Well, hello, I'm Eric Horvitz, Chief Scientific Officer at Microsoft. It's an honor to moderate today's panel on causal machine learning. I'd like to welcome our three expert panelists, all innovators and thought leaders on directions at the intersection of causal modeling and machine learning. Susan Athey, Yoshua Bengio, and Yuta Pearl. Susan is the Economics of Technology professor at Stanford Graduate School of Business. Her research is in the areas of industrial organization, microeconomic theory, and applied econometrics. Her current research focuses on the design of auction-based marketplaces and the economics of the internet, including with online advertising and the economics of the news media. Yoshua is a professor in the Department of Computer Science and Operations Research at Université de Montréal, as well as the founder and scientific director of MILA, the Montreal Institute for Learning Algorithms. He has made significant contributions in deep learning and was awarded the Turing Award for that work in 2018, along with Jeff Hinton and Jan LeCun. Yuta is a Chancellor's Professor of Computer Science at UCLA. He's well known as a champion and leading intellect on taking a probabilistic approach to AI, including his leadership with the development of Bayesian networks and associated inference algorithms. On today's topic, he is known for his tremendous efforts to develop a theory of causal and counterfactual inference based on structural models. Yuta received the Turing Award in 2011. Thank you all so much for joining me today. Machine learning has been advancing with successes in diagnosis, classification, prediction, and generation, and with impressive leaps in applications, especially capabilities on natural language and vision tasks. At the same time, AI systems are known by many who work with the latest methods as brittle and opaque when aimed at real-world challenges, in many cases with capabilities and blind spots that are difficult to characterize. Questions have been asked about whether the celebrated methods and models have sufficiently deep understandings of the semantics, of the meaning about people and processes in the world, and important capabilities for supporting human decision-making, like understanding the outcomes of actions and interventions, the causal structure of phenomena, seem to take a back seat to the easier tasks, frankly, of classification and prediction. The panel was organized to discuss the promising direction for progress via the deeper integration of machine learning with core concepts from causality, causal inference, causal reasoning. Conventional machine learning methods look for and find patterns in data. These patterns, though, are often end up being spurious and unstable. The hope is that by integrating causality and machine learning into machine learning, AI systems would be more grounded in how systems in the world actually work and could learn stable and reliable patterns of causality rather than the spurious and unreliable patterns that can lead to failures and misbehaviors. So we're seeing growing interest in causal machine learning. I would say that this area is emerging from the intersections of several disciplines, not only computer science, but economics, medicine, statistics, epidemiology, and others. There's much to discuss about causal models and causal machine learning, and it's great to have deep thinkers on that topic with us today. So let's get started with some discussion. So Yoshua, it's surprising with all the fanfare about deep learning that we see little work on causal inference and knowledge. Does deep learning need causality? And I'll just throw out, does causal modeling and inference need deep learning?
Yes to both questions, so let me try to elaborate. First, deep learning needs causality because deep learning needs to be more robust, as you were saying. And what I mean by robust here is continuing to generalize out of distribution, for example, after an intervention that changes the joint distribution of the data as you would normally see it. That happens commonly. It's not something rare. It's anytime we deploy machine learning in the field, it's happening. And there's good reason to think that if we incorporate some of the ideas in causality in the design of deep learning systems, we could hopefully get that kind of robustness. And one reason why I think so is because humans can do it. And humans have complicated neural nets, of course, in their head that we're trying to understand. And in fact, we're taking inspiration, at least in my group, from the way humans react to these changes in distribution. So that's the short answer to why deep learning needs causality. The other side, so why would causality need deep learning? Well, let's say that the deep learning crowd is trying to answer a different kind of causal question than what traditionally has been studied in causality. The standard setup in science, social sciences, and economics or whatever, physics, is one where we know what the causal variables are, and we're asking questions about their causal dependencies in the structure of the graph, and we may know some of the structure or types of distributions. Whereas in AI, typically the kind of AI that people do in deep learning, we're thinking about putting ourselves in the shoes of a 2-year-old or in the shoes of a robot that discovers the world. And if you're that being, you don't have all that knowledge. I mean, you may have a lot of innate knowledge, but really you have to discover what the causal variables are from low-level observations. And that's basically what deep learning has been about from the beginning, at least the way I was dreaming about it. And the way I started to discuss it in the 2000s is about learning abstract representations. And, what better abstract representation than the one that capture the underlying causal variables and how they're related to each other. So we are asking different questions and coming up with different algorithms, but I think it's just the beginning of a really exciting journey.
And I mean, so let's take this a tiny bit further here. We have a short amount of time today. Can this be done without introducing special causal mechanisms or special reasoning methods into deep learning methodologies?
Well, I do think that the current kinds of architectures and training frameworks are not well suited for incorporating causality. I mean, there is a lot of state-of-the-art research that's pushing that boundary, but we're not there yet. And again, if you look in the brain, we see different cognitive mechanisms going on when people are reasoning and using sort of conscious processing and verbalizable understanding of what they're doing and planning and so on. So there's also good reason to think that the kind of computations that are being performed is somewhat different. But what I also think is that this kind of different kind of computation is highly intertwined with the more traditional type. For example, when you want to do any kind of inference, for example, about the causes of what you observe, there's a search problem that classical AI has been trying to tackle, and that is fundamentally hard. But that's a place where, for example, generative machine learning, generative deep learning, if you want, could correspond to human imagination when you plan, when you come up with solutions to things. You don't have conscious access. You can't explain why you find a solution, a causal explanation, for example. But it comes to you out of a zillion possibilities. So that's that's a role for the more intuitive classical deep learning that's embedded into the reasoning system.
Very interesting. Turning to Yuta, so causal and counterfactual inference have come a long way, and thanks for all your incredible contributions. What's your sense for next steps in causal modeling?
If you are referring to my pet projects in the next, I think I have 35 years left. Yes, I can elaborate on that. But
I hope at least
want
that
to,
many years.
This is what Moses told me I should expect. So we are talking here, and let me first put it in some context, because what I'm going to say about my next pet project is based upon a sudden realization that I should have gotten 20 years ago, and I only recently became aware of. And this is that we are sitting on a gold mine. The first time in human history, we have a computational model for deep understanding. And I define deep understanding as a computational system that can answer three types of questions. The three levels of the causal hierarchy, namely beliefs, interventions, and counterfactuals. Okay? Counterfactual is related to explanations. Okay? So realizing that we are sitting on a gold mine, and we have the ability to model what we normally call deep understanding when we see an agent exhibit that capacity. The question is, what next? Okay? First thing on my list is taking it one step forward and generate an automated scientist. And this involves a scientist that can control attention, curiosity, and it can decide what experiment to conduct next, what observation would be helpful and relevant, to distinguish the relevant from the irrelevant, and communicate with other scientists, okay, with that language of understanding. So that's pet project number one. Okay? Automated scientists with all the facilities, the ingredients we see and that are entailed by ordinary scientists. And the next pet project is social intelligence. It goes like that. If you have the ability of modeling your domain, your environment, okay, why shouldn't you be able to model your agent, I mean the next agent, which is similar to you, but may have a different experience, different belief system, but you should be able to communicate with that agent with the same language that we see today people in social sciences, or let's say, I'll go differently. We see a communication among trustable people, when ordinary people who were born in a family and have developed from the crib, have developed a keen capability to decide whether the mother frowns or is happy with you, whether the father is trying to teach you or trying to scold you. And this is the basic, the first exposure that we have to relationships among people. And we do have the building block of automating that. So that is, at least for me, it's an exciting project.
Yes.
Because I can see it's already implemented. I did the blueprint. So we're talking about automating motivation, trust, responsibility, awareness, disappointments, free will, and all the nice things that we see in person-to-person communication. So that's the second one. I think if I accomplish that before my time is over, I'll feel very happy.
They both would be critically interesting and important contributions to humanity. Let me ask you, bringing you back from the frontiers to today, when it comes to causal modeling and methods, what are the blockers that we need to make to get these techniques into wider use? Education, benchmarks, new tools? Do we need fundamental breakthroughs in usability with these tools, for example? What needs to be done?
From my perspective, there are two kinds of blockage. First, starvation. We are starved. I'm talking about the community that is trying to develop these next steps in causal reasoning. We are starved partly because of the hype of deep learning. And the starvation means, if you look at the disproportionate investment that society had invested in AI, okay? It's a gigantic disproportion. You have hundreds and hundreds of PhDs coming out of the deep learning schools, okay, and maybe a dozen per year coming out with the emphasis on causal inference. Okay? It's a gigantic disproportion. So the starvation comes in two ways. Number one, funding, right? I have to spend most of my time convincing DARPA that I have something to say, but my grants are being reviewed by people.
That's where your second pet project will come in very useful when you get that all working. But go ahead.
Okay, yes. So this is one kind of starvation, and indirect starvation means that the attention of the people who are responsible for education, the attention is in deep learning, in data science. And data science is today reigned by deep learning people. Okay? Namely, whatever you do, it's going to be taken over by deep learning. And now I'm coming to the second type of blockage. Instead of starting things from scratch, right, perhaps we can amortize some of this investment that was done already by society. Use some of the building material that was invested in building the cathedral for deep learning, and using that, to re-educate or to just simply educate, inform people who are already engaged in machine learning with what causal inference is all about.
Yeah.
Okay. And here I would like to emphasize, I've done a lot of conversation on my Twitter account with 50,000
I've seen that
followers.
conversation.
Yes. And trying to assess where the real blockage is, the blockage of communication. And I believe it lies in the following, that people in machine learning underestimate the height of the barriers that comes between the three levels of the ladder of causation. The conception is that causal inference is some sort of ornament that you can decorate machine learning algorithms, and you got yourself an integration of causal inference into ordinary machine language algorithm. It's absolutely wrong. Why? Because if you look at the source of data, you need to have a different information source for each of the levels. Mm-hmm. So they underestimate the barriers, which for us, for computer, for causal inference, each transition from one level to another is like violating a conservation rule, conservation of momentum, or conservation of energy. Okay, you need a new force from the outside to boost it from one level to another. Okay? Because we look at the source of information, not at the algorithm. At the source of information, you need a booster from the outside, a new force. Okay? So this, I think, is the major blockage in communication between causal inference people and machine learning people. And this can be educated. If every machine learning student, PhD, get to know just two things that is so easy to acquire. Number one, the first two laws, fundamental laws of causal inference. One is the ability to generate counterfactual from a model of reality. The relationship between reality, a model of reality, and counterfactuals. Number one. Second one is relationship, is the disseparation, namely relationship between your model of reality and what you expect the data to do for you. Okay? Just these two laws will boost the understanding and bridge diversity and come to convergence between these two communities.
Let me ask you just briefly, as we're on this topic, I think one incredible takeaway from some of your writings is this pyramid of intelligence or hierarchy or levels, and that current AI focuses on pattern recognition and prediction. And I think in your figures you have little birds and lizards next to that level. And you talk about the magic of human intelligence making this leap into the world of causal understanding and intervention, the imagination of possibilities and counterfactuals, of course, is a different word for that. Can you share just briefly some of your reflection about the abilities that humans seem to have mastered and the pop that's had with what we've done as a species versus the nearest homologue vertebrates? Like, can you say a little bit more about that? I'm curious to hear your reflection, just more generally about intelligence.
I couldn't quite I couldn't pinpoint what you are heading at. Normally, I'm able to do that with you, Eric.
What I'm getting at is just hearing your reflection about what makes humans different in terms of our intellect when it comes to our ability to imagine and do counterfactual reasoning.
It's a template that we are born with, which contains the structure of for deep understanding. Namely, you have a template, and you have to fill it in with parameters. But I believe that we are born with the templates, so that a child in the crib can discover and fill in the blanks. Okay, when the child learns how to manipulate toys, so that a student of epidemiology can just listen to what another epidemiologist says and understand it. Okay? That is a template of structural causal models. It's the only one that we have now. Perhaps the alternative. But currently, I'm familiar with only one template that allows you to model deep understanding. And I've defined it very mathematically. Deep understanding is any symbolic system that can answer three types of questions: belief, intervention, and explanation.
Got it. Thanks, Yuda. So, Susan, you have experience working with top decision makers, both in the policy and the business space. What are some examples of efforts you've been involved with, and how have insights from causal models helped with advising senior leaders?
So yeah, causal reasoning is really top of mind for policymakers and business analysts. And actually, I've been running a conference for the last 5 or 6 years for economists in tech firms, and we have panel discussions about what does it mean and what would you need to prepare. And by far the biggest mind share of advice for young people and discussions is about using applied causal inference, and actually reacting to some of the things that you all have been talking about already. Part of the thing is the tech firms are filled up with people who can train neural nets, who can build recommendation systems, who learn to do off-the-shelf prediction. But actually, when somebody comes and says, hey, was that advertising campaign actually beneficial? And, should we change prices? Or, what's going to be the impact of Amazon Prime? Or, for Microsoft, one of the problems I worked on was, well, gosh, what's going to happen to the advertising marketplace if we acquire Yahoo? Or if we bring in more search traffic? What's going to happen? Those are the big questions you need. And long ago people made them qualitatively, but today those decisions are quantitative, and there's a desire and a need to put numbers on them from empirical analysis. And thinking about one of the harder ones, something like what's going to happen if we buy Yahoo, or if you think about bringing in more participants to one side of a two-sided marketplace. The participants attract advertisers, the advertisers help you attract publishers. There's auction models going on where the bidders are bidding against one another. So because some of these counterfactuals can be quite complex, while others are maybe a bit more straightforward conceptually, like, okay, what happens if you change price? But in general, this is people have been trying to used data and models together to answer these kinds of questions for decades. It used to be that empirical people in firms, like there was a big tranche of them that were just estimating the price elasticity of Cheerios, or trying to understand about coupons and discounts. While today, again, you're going to have to decide whether changing a recommendation system is going to change the equilibrium number of buyers and sellers in your marketplace. So I just would say generally, this is like front and center. And in fact, the gap that's been left by the masses of people doing prediction has, created an opportunity for those people who really work in this area. I would say that some of the very specific things, though, is that people do want numbers. They want good numbers, credible numbers. Business people now are sophisticated and critical. If you say, here my data shows that, introducing this product was beneficial, even top executives have learned to think critically. They've seen their A/B testing platforms. They've seen, good studies and bad studies. And so actually being able to be very clearly defend the credibility of your estimates is extremely valuable. One of my friends tells a story about how I won't say which one, but the CEO of a top 5 tech firm, not Microsoft, was listening to managers make causal claims from an empirical study with without a great empirical strategy, without having well understood the data generating process. And the CEO says, well, I think there's some confounders there. Confounders being things that affect both the treatment assignment and the outcome, and thus yield these estimates as more correlation than causation. And he started quizzing the executive presenting to him, well, why didn't you use propensity score modeling and started asking about methodology, and the poor executive was terrified and went back to ask some of the data science team to explain how to think about things, and they just hadn't done their homework. So I find today that top executives, I sit on 5 tech company boards, top executives have seen enough presentations and have seen enough good evidence and bad evidence that they will both demand high quality empirical studies, commission them if needed, and be critical of unconvincing evidence.
And where do you see machine learning and the advances in machine learning on the prediction, classification side of things to boost what it is that you've been doing for years?
Yeah, so I came into Microsoft in 2007, well trained in a set of empirical techniques about doing counterfactuals that came from a certain tradition, the way that we've been thinking about things. And actually I was trained in multiple. I was always someone who used the tool for the job rather than sticking to one. So some of them use models, like when we were trying to model bidders in auctions. Some of them were more just understanding a treatment effect, like what's the effect of changing a price or what's the effect of minimum wages. When I got to Microsoft, I was exposed to this whole world of machine learning scientists building this huge system. And at first I was like drinking from the fire hose, trying to understand it. Then after a little while, I thought they were all crazy, because how could they be doing what they were doing and not understand anything about causal inference? I thought my whole training, like what I thought the definition of statistics was, they didn't even know the words. But on the other hand, they were doing all sorts of stuff that I wasn't used to doing. And so I spent a lot of time there. You're just trying to solve problems, trying to figure out how to take the best of both worlds. And so I think some of the ways that we've been doing things were limited. For example, a big dependence on, specific functional forms. There was a theoretical literature in econometrics that used kernels and things like that to try to relax functional forms, but applied practitioners never used them because they didn't work very well, and they were very fragile. While the machine learning methods of data-driven model fitting were actually really good for doing semi-parametric or non-parametric analysis. And so what I kind of started realizing was that you can't throw away your understanding of data generating processes. Whether you're a Bayesian modeler or whether you use classical techniques or these equations or that equation. In some sense, whatever you were doing that was the best approach for the counterfactual estimation in a small data setting in an old-fashioned way. You can't throw that away. You can't stop thinking about the assumptions. You can't stop criticizing your assumptions. You can't stop really, really studying the data generating process. But there are pieces of this problem that you can outsource to prediction. There are parts like say you just need a really good prediction model for the treatment assignment. That can be a neural net. And that neural net may be a lot better than a simple logistical regression. So we've been part of the community, part of the research agenda over the last 10 years that's been hugely successful and very popular has been bringing in, decomposing counterfactual estimation into the prediction components of the problem, outsourcing that to cross-validation and data generating stuff while maintaining the structure of causal inference. And I've used that in studying, trying to estimate price elasticities and trying to understand consumer behavior. And we've used that for personalization, trying to understand, which medical treatments or which types of, nudges or informational interventions or educational interventions are most suited for different individuals.
Yeah, interesting. It's interesting. I think the pandemic actually highlighted to the average citizen that we're often in situations where we don't have the ability to do randomized controlled trials, yet have access to rich observational data. How could causal models help us with making inferences outside of the randomized controlled trials, where we require the carefully matched groups and so on?
Yeah, well, I think one reason economics was always so interested in causal inference is because we never had randomized controlled trials, or very rarely. So like almost any question we ever answered was from observational data. And so, we'd have to say, what was the effect of immigration? What was the effect of the mural boat lift? What was the effect of minimum wage laws? What was the effect of abortion restrictions? What was and then for the Department of Justice, what would happen if these two firms merged? For all sorts of litigation, what was the impact on prices from firms colluding? So, we've always had to use observational data. Almost everything we did was observational data. And of course, parts of epidemiology have also had the same kinds of problems where you don't have randomized experiments. So those disciplines, I think, put a lot of attention to it all along. Yeah. I would say that there's some new opportunities, though, that I think arise with larger data sets in the modern era. So you can combine experimental data and observational data, or you can use observational data to determine when to use experiments. So in tech firms, there's this kind of innovation cycle where you do some empirical studies or offline analysis, using historical data that wasn't designed for your question. That then can help you prioritize which features to prototype, which you then go throw into the A/B testing platform and then repeat the cycle. And I'm helping educational technology firms and training technology firms use those techniques for social impact. In medicine, Great. You can look at electronic medical records and look out at what's happened in the past and use that to help prioritize clinical trials of different kinds of off-label uses of drugs or other kinds of treatments. So there's just a huge opportunity there. And I think, observational data and experimental data are complements, not substitutes. The experimental data can help you choose between models and help you guide your development of models used for observational data. And then the observational data helps you determine which experiments to run. And then putting them together, you can do things like understand personalized treatment effects better in environments where your experiments are too small to do everything that you want to do.
Yeah. Well, thanks. Let me just quickly. I want to ask Yoshua to react to Yudah's comment earlier about the inadequacy, potentially, I'll put a word in Yudah's mouth, of snapping on causality and causal mechanisms and counterfactual reasoning as an afterthought or at the next stage of work on, let's say, deep learning versus foundational from the beginning and underpinnings. I'm not sure if I'm capturing or paraphrasing you correctly, Yudah, but it's probably good enough to get a reaction from Yoshua.
Sure. Well, first of all, I wanna tell Yudia that things are changing, and there's a really rapidly increasing interest in causality in the machine learning community. And this panel is kind of part of that, but it's much bigger. A lot of students and professors, for example, in my institute at Mila, are interested. We have now workshops at the main machine learning conferences. And of course, people might be thinking about questions maybe in a different way than what you have, and I think that's good. We need a diversity of ways of thinking. One thing I would like to ask you, Yuda, because you said something earlier that I didn't completely understand, and I want to make sure I understand properly. So you talked about kind of being born with the right template. So I was wondering if you mean that we are born with the right causal graph, the right causal variables that we will need for our life, and then we, like the epidemiologist student that you were talking about, it just needs to fill in the parameters and already has the causal structure?
No, of course not, because the causal graph changes from one domain to another. But you are born with the ability to adapt a causal graph when someone gives it to you, when you see one, when you suspect one, or to think about what should be the data look like if I assume certain graph. The ability to go from a graph to fill in the parameter and to reason with graph. So that is what I'm talking about.
But what about inference? What about inference in the graph? How do you infer potentially, causal explanations in the form of causal graphs? It seems to me that's a question that needs more attention, doesn't it?
This is the first law of causal inference. Given a graph, how do you generate explanation? How do you generate counterfactuals? Okay.
No. Let's say you're not given the graph. That's my question.
So
if you're not given the graph.
If you're not given it, you still are born with the ability to say, what if the world was of that character? Namely, what if reality was in the form of a given graph? I should be able to infer counterfactual from that graph. Okay? So that is, I believe,
but there's an exponential number of such graphs, right? So
sure.
It seems to me like a hard problem is to infer that.
No, wait.
It sounds like there's really great research between the assertion about what must be going on efficiently in human minds and the way to do that exactly well, efficiently, with arbitrary knowledge and new learnings. I'm guessing that's what you're getting at, Yoshua. And that let me just, go ahead, Yuda.
I just want to elaborate on that. Searching for the graph or searching for the model is one task, okay? But regardless of how you get it, either by being told, either by being taught, or by hearsay, or by automatic procedure that get it from the data. Regardless, you have to keep it separately from a model of the data. You have to keep separately the model of reality and the model of the data. And then you have to reason about them from one to another. You have to reason and generate explanation for a human being, namely for people who share that template, not for people who went through the same algorithm of getting the graph. You have to produce explanation that will be compatible with the way user thinks about reality. And that's why you have to keep them separately.
So given the short amount of time we have today, this kind of tension and discussion where we're trying to get to even common ground with what we understand versus what we don't and where we're going, coming up between the points and the questions that Yoshua asked Yuda and Yuda's comments back and so on. We'll pause that right now and keep that into the research domain, including satisfying answers. And let me just ask each of you, Susan, Yoshua, and Yuda, to just reflect about the most important challenges ahead in causal ML, machine learning, where should researchers focus their efforts to achieve highest impact? What are your suggestions for up and coming next generations of researchers in this field? And maybe let's start with you, Yoshua.
Well, I'm very excited about the potential of transforming deep learning into a framework that incorporates the ability to generalize out of distribution by incorporating interventions, which is essentially the heart of causality, and getting inspiration from the way specifically humans do it, to build machines that maybe resemble more what the way babies gradually come up to a causal understanding of the world, from which we're very far off right now in machine learning.
Interesting. Yuda, what are your thoughts? Next steps, big impact.
Immediate steps is providing a platform to make it easier for people who wants to get into the game between machine learning and causal inference to be able to make it, to facilitate the accessibility of the theory and making it easy for people to learn and to practice pet projects. And in that, I think we should also have a success story. It's not enough to have a platform, you have a success story. And so far, we didn't have a success story in causal inference. We just changed people's mind, okay? Scientists' mind, but we didn't come out with any object recognition, for instance, system or natural language. It is directly a result of causal inference. But I think that the next success story is going to be personalized medicine or any personalized treatment, okay? Because that requires counterfactual logic. And we do have the templates now to do that. So I'm talking about not only covariance specific analysis, or causal effect for under a subpopulation, but personalized, namely to taking an individual and inferring the effect of a new drug on this specific individual, given a combination of observational and interventional data. Because it turns out that this combination sometimes gives you very narrow bounds. So you can do real personalized medicine.
I'd love to take that offline with you in some steps and conversation on that. That'd be great. Susan, your thoughts just to wrap up important challenges ahead, advice to future generations, impactful research.
Yeah, well, I really agree with Judea, but then just bigger picture, I think in the fields I worked in, until maybe 15 years ago, we had really kind of gotten to the frontier of the different combinations of things that would allow you to draw inferences. Observational data has limits. There are theorems that say, here are just questions you can't answer with certain kinds of observational data. We didn't have a lot of experiments. And then we made a pretty heavy use of models, including functional form assumptions or models that reflected the physical data generating process, as well as behavioral assumptions, like learning, I bought this product, that must reveal something about my unobserved preference for that product. So we would combine those things together to try to do counterfactuals. Then now going forward, it's like we've relaxed so many constraints and we have so many more we could relax that we can kind of revisit that whole frontier. We can measure more with observational data. We can measure more unobservables, more high frequency. We have many more experiments. When you go high frequency, there are more natural experiments. Plus, we're just running a lot more experiments in the world. And then we still have the ability to incorporate models and assumptions about behavior to contribute to our inferences about what firms are doing and what market participants are doing. And so we've seen huge steps forward. We've got, reinforcement learning, and we have neural networks and all these things, but we haven't actually pieced together even what the frontier looks like with all of these new tools. And we have so much more of an opportunity to intervene in our environment strategically in order to learn. So I feel like in some sense, we have to go refine the frontier again. And that's going to be a super exciting journey with so many different kinds of contributions to be made.
Oh, that's very exciting. Well, that's gone very quickly. Thanks, Yoshua, Susan, and Yuda for such an interesting, enlightening conversation. Causal models and opportunities to mesh advances in causal representations and inference with machine learning and vice versa. These are such rich areas of opportunity for research and development. I see advances and great impact on the horizon. Even in the tensions we've just heard, these are cauldrons of creativity, the tensions and the different points of view. Thank you all again for sharing your thoughts and insights today.
Thank you, Eric. And thank you, Joshua and Susan.
Thank you, Thanks, Susan.
Thanks. It was a real honor to be on the panel with all of you. Thank you so much.